You know, last year I introduced my video by saying 2021 felt like the calm before the storm. But now at the end of the year, I think saying 2022 was just a storm would be an understatement.
I couldn't catch my breath between all the games coming out this year. Normally I can at least play most of the ones I want and just pass over a few small indie titles that I was mildly interested in. But this year I had to avert my eyes from every indie release. Because the first-party output was so high, I only bought 2 third-party games, both of which are also full-fledged longer titles, and neither of which I ultimately had time to play. I was hoping to check out a Mori, Inscription, or One Shot. That didn't happen. I've been wanting to play the Portal games since those are legendary titles I've never touched, yet this will be the only mention of the Portal Companion Collection you'll hear in this video. At the beginning of 2022, there was a chance I'd give Sonic Frontiers a try, just to see if I could become a fan of the Hedgehog. Then Pokemon decided one meaty game wasn't enough for the year, and my November fate was sealed. It wasn't until I looked up a list of Switch games released this year to see if I'd failed to recall anything notable, that I realized. I told myself for years that if Persona 5 ever came to Switch, I'd play it. 2022 was the year that very thing happened, and I forgot. Shredder's Revenge looked sick, but my love of TMNT couldn't justify a purchase when I was neck deep in Xenoblade 2 at the time of release, as Nintendo had to announce Xenoblade 3 with only 7 months to prepare, only to then tell us we actually only had 5 months from the initial reveal. I also replayed the entirety of Undertale to collect footage from my Perfect Games video, and I rushed through Deltarune once more for the same reason. I got behind wanting to make my videos discussing 2021 games, which put me behind trying to make videos on my 2022 games, which is completely unsurprising for me. Even if I hadn't replayed anything, 2022 was still crazy, even limiting your scope to Switch. Like, Tears of the Kingdom was delayed into 2023, and I didn't mind. In fact, I was grateful. Obviously, the big game not playable on Switch this year was Elden Ring, but honestly this is one case where I wouldn't be interested even if I did own different hardware. I did some research and I'd only be about 33% into the type of fun that game offers, which simply isn't enough to justify a purchase. And even less of me would have enjoyed Bayonetta 3. Ironically, because of my replaying games and the length of the games I did play, the quantity of games I'll be talking about today is a bit less than most years. But as someone who does his best to avoid a backlog, I still ended the year with 2 games I paid for and haven't yet touched, and lots of hours in many of the games I will go over. Which is why I have to confess the footage quality won't be quite on par with last year's. While I'm really proud of the quality of my 2021 list, where I feel for the first time my commentary matches up well with the footage on screen, I do not have the time to get and edit matching footage for everything I'll bring up this year. Nintendo is not letting up whatsoever with both Metroid and Kirby releasing under a week away from when I'm recording this. So I'm going back to the old style of having random footage of the game on screen and not necessarily footage that correlates with what I'm saying. Luckily, my videos are made to be enjoyable in a sort of podcast form anyway, so whether you choose to look at the screen or not, I think my point should still make sense. Oh yeah, and I attempted to record my sections for Legends Arceus and Kirby shortly after I played them, rather than waiting until the end of the year. But that method fell apart by April. So just know the first 2 sections are gonna differ in quality from the rest of the video. Speaking of, let's finally get into the meat of this ranking.
Hey guys, I'm 22 and I never learned how to shave without cutting myself, but I recently beat Pokemon Legends Arceus, the very first game of this year. And if you've watched my 2020 games list, you probably know that I wasn't just feeling excitement towards this game, but also a bit of fear.
Long story short, the Pokemon Sword and Shield DLC made me realize that I was sort of buying Pokemon games out of a fear that I would get behind on catching them all when the next one came out, but that I ultimately didn't actually care about catching them all in the first place. So therefore, the entire reason I was buying Pokemon games was kind of pointless. This not only led to me completely avoiding the Diamond and Pearl remakes that came out last year, but also deciding entirely that Pokemon Legends Arceus might decide whether I continue to like Pokemon or not, or at least the game series. The game looked like it could be the reinvention of the series, or at least the game series, that Pokemon needed. However, if it wasn't, then it would basically just tell me I was no longer interested in the Pokemon games. Maybe I could still be a fan for the anime or something like that, but as for the games, I could skip out for a while. So now that I have played Pokemon Legends Arceus, I have some unfortunate news to report. I am still a Pokemon fan.
If I'm being completely honest here, I am surprised that I liked this game. I did not expect that this one would save Pokemon for me. From all the trailers and everything, it looked like it would be kind of boring going around and just catching Pokemon here and there. But no, all of it is just so engaging. This truly is the Pokemon game that we've been waiting for years.
If you watched the trailers and thought like me that it wouldn't be the most exciting Pokemon game, I urge you to give it a chance, because you really have to play the game in order to understand the appeal of it. It's not something you can get just by watching other people play it, at least not in my opinion. Now, this is Game Freak's first time making this type of game, which means it's not going to be completely flawless. And let's talk about the things that I didn't like first. While this game features turn-based battles, the vast majority of it is actually somewhat of an action RPG, with you directly controlling the player and moving and dodging Pokemon's attacks. However, I have to say that this game definitely feels like an action RPG with the physics of a non-action RPG. For example, the definitive edition of Xenoblade Chronicles has some wonky physics, but there's barely any platforming in the game, so it doesn't really matter. In this game, on the other hand, a lot of the game is defined by your world traversal, so the fact that it has wonky physics does get in the way a lot. I think the biggest example comes with the ride Pokemon Weirdeer. There are many locations in the game that you are very clearly supposed to be able to traverse with Weirdeer, but the ledges are like just barely too high for the Pokemon to be able to jump up. In this game, you actually fight bosses one-on-one by throwing bombs at them and dodging their attacks, rather than using the traditional turn-based combat with Pokemon. These boss battles are very fun overall, but you can definitely tell they're not designed by people who normally design action games. You're supposed to have invincibility frames during your dodge, but sometimes for some reason you'll still be hit by an attack after dodging. It's also possible to get yourself completely cornered in these fights, having absolutely no way to avoid the boss's attacks. Coming back to ride Pokemon like Weirdeer, I do overall have a positive opinion of ride Pokemon as a mechanic, but there are a few things I really wish they would change. There are 3 ride Pokemon shown off in the trailers. Weirdeer for ground travel, Basculegion for water travel, and Hisuian Braviary for air travel. Switching between these 3 Pokemon is perfectly seamless. On Weirdeer, you just have to go into water and you'll switch to Basculegion. Jump on land, you'll switch to Weirdeer. With both of these, you jump in the air and press A, and you'll switch to Hisuian Braviary. While on Braviary, if you dive into water, you'll switch to Basculegion. If you dive into land, you'll switch to Weirdeer. This works perfectly. What doesn't work perfectly is that there are 2 Pokemon with ground traversal that weren't shown in the trailers that don't switch nearly as seamlessly. I won't be showing these other 2 ride Pokemon for spoiler reasons, but what I'll say is switching between the other 3 is so seamless because you can continue moving while doing so. To switch to these 2, you have to use the D-pad, meaning you have to let go of the control stick. Weirdeer and Braviary are also in this menu, meaning there are 4 Pokemon you're switching between. Of course, Basculegion is only available when you go in the water. This means you can be 2 clicks away from whatever desired Pokemon you want at any given time, which may not sound super annoying, but over the game's time span, you'll eventually get sick of it. One of the other Pokemon is required to get over a certain type of obstacle. The problem with this Pokemon is, as soon as you get over that obstacle, it won't instantly switch back to whatever your previous ride Pokemon was, before you activated it. And there's nothing you can really do with this ride Pokemon except get over said obstacle. None of this sounds so bad until you consider the worst part of all of this. The only ride Pokemon that you can use Pokeballs and other items on is Basculegion. The only one of these that makes sense to me is Braviary, as at least with that one you are high above the air and it may not make sense to try and throw stuff at stuff on the ground. But with any of the Pokemon that are for ground traversal, why can't I throw Pokeballs while on top of them? I can't catch Pokemon, and I can't throw Pokemon to obtain items for me. Which means the ride Pokemon, which are supposed to be about convenience, end up forcing me to have to get on and off of them over and over again every time I see something I want to interact with. My solution to this would be to keep Braviary and Basculegion as they are for air and water traversal, but for ground traversal, give me one singular Pokemon that I progressively gain abilities for. It can start out just being able to run and jump like Weirger can, but over time I can gain the ability to throw items off of its back, just like with Basculegion, and then I can gain the other two abilities of the other two ride Pokemon. This way I'm not losing the abilities of Weirdeer while using the other ride Pokemon. Instead I have one Pokemon that keeps Weirdeer's abilities and just gains the other abilities of the other Pokemon. Heck, this can even be done through the process of evolution that Pokemon has had since the beginning. Give me a one-stage Pokemon that's just big enough for me to ride on, and then have it evolve according to the story so that I can use these additional abilities. However, those are only issues because they detract from the combat and traversal, which in my opinion are otherwise fantastic. You no longer have to worry about starting a battle with some possibly randomly generated Pokemon that you don't even know the species of, and then hoping it's one you want, and then having to catch it. Every single Pokemon in this game is out in the wild for you to see what it is, and you can catch it potentially without even battling it, aside from maybe some legendary or mythical Pokemon. Filling out the Pokedex in most Pokemon games feels sort of forced. Like, the professor is like, here's the Pokedex, now go fill out this checklist of Pokemon that we already know about. Setting this game in the past and having you fill out the region's first Pokedex was a brilliant move. It makes the Pokedex feel important and also gives you a legitimate reason to be filling out a Pokedex in the first place. Again, it's hard to describe the appeal of this game, which is why this segment might be more me nitpicking it than me describing why I love it, despite the fact that I definitely loved it more than I found it annoying. It's all about the feel. Take, for example, the backstrike, where you simply throw a Pokeball at a Pokemon's back. It sounds simple enough, but pulling it off is just one of the best feeling things you'll do in a game. I mean, I honestly don't think there was anything I did in Metroid Dread that just felt as good as pulling off a backstrike in this game. My hope now is simply that this isn't just a one-off adventure for Pokemon. I hope they continue to do Pokemon Legends games, and in fact, I hope they take this format and put it into the mainline Pokemon games themselves. It's already pretty formulaic, so I can very easily see it working on a gym-to-gym type game. I also hope they do choose to continue to build off this formula rather than just try and replace new gimmicks like they tend to do with the standard games. What you've got here, Game Freak, is gold, so continue to build on it and make it into something really, really special rather than try and force new stuff into it without focusing on tidying up the core gameplay that you've already set up here.
Wait, what the fuck? As I stated at the start of the segment, I just recently beat this game, meaning I actually am recording this in February, shortly after beating it. In fact, I'm actually recording it before I recorded some of the stuff for the 2021 games list, so sorry about that. What that means is at the moment of recording, I have no idea where this is going to stack up to anything else that's been put out. But given how crazy of a year it's looking to be, I actually can see this being on the lower portion of the list, but that's not because of anything against it. Actually, in a normal year, this would probably be pretty dang high. It could even be Game of the Year on a lesser year, like maybe last year, for example. But because we're getting stuff like Xenoblade 3 and Splatoon 3 and probably even Breath of the Wild 2, I don't think this is gonna be that high on the list. And it's sad to say because I really am happy with what Game Freak was able to deliver here after so long of just not putting out Pokemon content that I was truly enjoying. All that being said, let's now see how it stacks up to Kirby. Like many video game franchises, Kirby is one that I've been interested in for a very long time and just never really given a chance. Around the time the Switch released, I told myself I would try to start branching out to series I haven't really dived into before. But unfortunately, when Star Allies released, it was almost exactly a year after the Switch did. So at that point, I was still trying to play games from the Switch's absolutely insane first year. I told myself I might eventually play Star Allies and just never got around to it. I don't think Nintendo and HAL really liked the sentiment though, because they decided to create a game that would force people like me to become Kirby fans in his first 3D outing, Kirby and the Forgotten Land. If you want a game that's just pure joy, this is the game you're looking for. You might be wondering how this game manages to be so upbeat despite the post-apocalyptic setting. The answer lies in a Nintendo conducted Ask the Developer interview, in which the devs stated they wanted the player to feel the joy of what once was, rather than the sadness of what was lost. And that's exactly what they executed. The melancholy most games would evoke in this setting is instead replaced by the delightful exploration of this once jubilant world. Every level feels distinct both in its theming and its gameplay. They all introduce new mechanics and build upon them so naturally that you don't even realize how much you learned instinctively unless you really stop to think about it. Each stage has multiple collectibles in the form of hidden Waddle Dees and gotcha figures, and 5 challenges to complete. 1 for clearing the stage, 1 for finding every Waddle Dee, and 3 more that are specific to each stage. The game will give you a text description of 1 challenge you missed each time you beat the level, though if you explore every nook and cranny, which is highly encouraged, you'll likely succeed at most of the challenges on your first pass through a stage anyway. It's very rare you'll need to play through a stage more than once just to know what all the challenges are. I do, however, feel that the game could benefit from a restart from checkpoint option. Certain challenges are failable, such as beat X enemy without getting hit, so if I'm playing through a level just for that challenge and I fail it, my options are to restart the entire level or intentionally die to restart from the last checkpoint, which sacrifices star coins. Luckily, the stages are designed so they're very easy to burn through in a matter of minutes, but I do believe that an option to restart from a checkpoint without purposefully killing yourself would alleviate some of the little pain I felt trying to do some challenges. The reward for completing challenges is more Waddle Dees, which is a bit weird conceptually. Like, why does Kirby not falling in the water during this fight save a Waddle Dee? Were they watching off screen and seeing Kirby pull off such a feat gave them the strength to pull the cage bars apart themselves, but no other feat could accomplish that? This is just a funny observation, not a legitimate complaint. However, I do have an idea for challenge rewards that I think might be better. Gotcha figures. There are 256 in total, and collecting all of them is required for 100% completion. Rather than pause screen descriptions from past Kirby games, these are how you get your lore in Forgotten Land. It's not anything more than a mild nitpick, but I do wonder if getting specific figures for completing challenges would be a better reward than Waddle Dees. Give us 1 figure for simply beating the level, another for finding every Waddle Dee in the level, and 3 more for the 3 additional challenges. There are 15 figures you already obtained through doing certain tasks, and 31 stages with challenges in the game, so if we do the math, this would still leave us with 86 gotcha figures for us to collect in stages and through the machine, without forcing us to spend so many star coins on them post-game. Now, the game does seem to be hard-coded so you can't obtain 3 repeats in a row, and by the end of my adventure, all I had to do was enter a few present codes to get enough cash for the final figures. But I do think the solution would help alleviate some post-game grinding for other players. As far as I'm concerned, after I found every Waddle Dee, completed every challenge, 100% of the post-game levels, and beat the final boss rush, I may as well have achieved 100%.
Having to stand at the machines and spend a bunch of star coins to fill out my collection was a small bit of tedium I think could have been avoided by giving out gacha figures instead of Waddle Dees for challenges. This change would require a small amount of adjustment, as the number of Waddle Dees you've saved determines when the boss levels open and opens a few buildings early, but that would be a pretty simple adjustment to make. Again, these are both minor nitpicks. The gacha aren't as annoying as you might think it could be, and levels are built so there's plenty to search for and do to get your money's worth, but it's also quick to rush through them if you're just trying to get a certain challenge done. So in the end, neither of these are as tedious as I may be making them sound. While I'm on a negative streak, I may as well get my last issue with the game out of the way. This game features the dodging mechanic. I don't have a problem with that at all. Dodging is one of the most fun things to do in this game, and it's essential for later boss fights. However, this is like the one thing in Kirby's basic toolkit you're not told about. The tutorial teaches you how to do everything except this, and there's no little example footage to simply teach you that holding a trigger and tapping your joystick in a direction will cause Kirby to dodge for all. Granted, I do think most players will eventually discover this on their own, but it's pretty important to know, so I don't get why the game wouldn't explicitly state this fact. It definitely makes the first couple bosses a bit harder than they needed to be. With that out of the way though, I have nothing left to complain about. And you'll notice, none of those are as annoying as Legend's Arceus flaws. You may think that this game having only 12 copy abilities is small, but thanks to the new evolving system it's the perfect balance. I think with too many more abilities, evolving them could become a harrowing task. With the number we have, there's enough to provide lots of variety in gameplay styles, but upgrading all of them doesn't ever seem overbearing. That's not to say I'd be opposed to more in future titles, but I think this amount is just right for our first 3D title. Evolving copy abilities is the perfect system to implement for this type of game too, as it allows Kirby's power to scale with the difficulty in a way past games couldn't. Mouthful mode is this game's other big change aside from the Z-axis. First, I have to give the developers props for allowing Kirby's current copy ability to be maintained after he exits Mouthful mode. I was worried going in that I might come across situations where I'd want to avoid Mouthful mode so I wouldn't lose my current ability, but instead, Kirby's current headgear, body gear 2, I guess, stays on him as he envelops a car, vending machine, or whatever else he comes across. This allows for Mouthful mode to be something you pop in and out of throughout each level, rather than something that shows up as a stage gimmick here and there and is otherwise ignored. Now of course, I and everyone else had conflicting feelings about this ability when it was revealed. As fun as it looked, there's no denying it's, bizarre. However, thanks to this game's childish nature, it never feels weird in context. After the first couple times, you stop thinking about it in that way and see it only as a charming, goofy gameplay mechanic that fits right into this game's atmosphere. The sight of Kirby with his mouth wrapped around half a car is just really funny to me now, and I honestly hope they bring the mechanic back in future games. My last thought is about the difficulty. This game is super easy up until the very end. My only deaths during the main game were intentional to restart from a checkpoint, as I stated earlier. However, if you do want a challenge, the postgame is primarily made for Kirby's core gamer fans. There were 2 bosses who killed me on their own, one of them more than once, and the final boss rush is brutal. And if you want something on Elden Ring's difficulty level, look no further than Tilt and Roll Kirby Level 3 Extra Hard version. Seriously, you have no idea how much time and how many star coins I spent on this. Kirby and the Forgotten Land is a pure joyride, and it doesn't try to be much more than that. And when it does, it succeeds. Without spoiling anything, all I'll say is that as much as I love the game from the beginning on, the end game is what elevates this from a fun game to a great one. Kirby and the Forgotten Land had only some very minor nitpicks and was overall a fantastic 3D action platformer. Like Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time, Kirby's first foray into 3D hit the nail on the head in his first outing. If you can't guess already, Pokemon has been dethroned by game number 2. Wii Sports is Nintendo's best-selling game of all time due to it being bundled in with the Wii. This game is more well-known than some Mario titles, and it's even responsible for introducing many to gaming as a whole. With a follow-up console that also used motion controls, it seemed inevitable that the Switch would eventually see its own form of a Wii Sports game,
be it in the form of a port or what we got, Nintendo Switch Sports, a full-blown sequel.
Given that this is a brand new game in the style of Wii Sports, it's natural to introduce online as a core element, allowing players to enjoy motion-controlled games in separated households. Given the inherent fun of motion-controlled games, the addition of online, and all the fun new bonus stuff like costumes Nintendo was adding, this game seemed like a surefire great time. It wouldn't have to do much in order to gain my favor. So it's a shame this is going on the lower end of my rankings. Let me first go over each sport individually, and then I'll cover some broader topics. Volleyball is probably the game I have the least issues with. The one issue I do have is how it's team-based, meaning you can lose games due to no fault of your own. However, I enjoy that the game has prompts telling you exactly what you'll be doing next, so you don't have to worry about missing anything because you were expecting to do something else. All around, this is a pretty fun game of teamwork and strategy. Tennis isn't too far behind. What's weird is there's no option for singles tennis. You have to play doubles, and if you're by yourself, you get a holographic body double, meaning your character and the hologram do everything synchronously. At first I hated this sport because of the hologram gimmick. There are several times where I feel the timing is unfair, where I swing right when the ball should be hittable for my hologram up front, but I somehow miss. Then the game refuses to register me trying again with my character in back. That being said, I did eventually get a better feel for the timing, and once I realized it's more a game about trying to get your opponent to hit the ball out of bounds, rather than always relying on getting a double bounce on them, it got a lot better for me. Nonetheless, there are still times where I feel the holograms don't detect my hit when they should, and I am also often put up against pairs of people, which I feel is an inherent disadvantage since each partner has less of the court to focus on. Badminton and Chambara have similar issues to one another in that they both use full range motion controls. Most games here just detect simple swinging motions in various directions, but Badminton and Chambara give you a full range of movement Skyward Sword style. These present exactly the issues you might expect. Badminton is a bit better because you're still hitting back and forth over a net, meaning there's nothing your opponent can do to mess you up while it's on your side. Chambara though... This game is a literal sword match. You're playing in real time with a full range of motion. This works out okay when the motion controls work, but there are several times when they don't work perfectly. I've noticed plenty of diagonal slices be interpreted as side slices or vice versa. And 2, when one player has a slow internet connection, this mode faces an issue Badminton doesn't. It lags like crazy. This makes the match borderline unplayable. For example, my opponent will be guarding horizontally, so I attack horizontally. But by the time my sword hits them, they've already moved their sword halfway across their body. Not because they're fast, but because the game is rendering their actions 5 seconds behind. When the motion control works, this mode is fun, but it's easily the one where poor internet connections bear their fangs the worst. Soccer is probably my least favorite sport. It's definitely the one I spend the least amount of time with. The issue is it takes 3 minutes to play each round, plus several more minutes to load in, since this one requires 8 players rather than 2 or 4. On top of that, it frequently results in a tie, forcing overtime. What I dislike about this mode is how big the ball is and how little stamina you have. People joke this game was like Rocket League without cars, but that really is an apt description. Imagine a ball the size of Rocket League's, but having to run around slowly to the other side anytime it comes near you to kick it. It's painful. Honestly, the field itself may be too big as well. I feel like I'm just running around in empty circles with nobody around me while I wait for my teammates to pass the ball. That's the other thing, your stamina is so limited and the field so big that it's honestly better to have an offense player stand in the enemy's field to get the ball when it comes to them. Honestly, would have preferred regular soccer, or better yet, another sport, since Mario Strikers is releasing soon. Lastly, there's bowling. Now initially I wasn't a fan of the tournament mode it's set up as. Every player bowls at once, which is great, but the thing is the survival bowling basically requires you to get a strike and a spare every single one of the first 3 frames, or there's no way you're moving on. Like tennis though, I grew to enjoy the sport for what it was. Once I started to get better at throwing the ball, my outlook on bowling totally changed. I was regularly making finals, and even got first place several times. Then I ranked up, and was forced into obstacle bowling, where random obstacles are thrown onto the alley to make hitting the pin straight forward harder or impossible. I saw people complaining about this happening in ranked mode and just figured, oh well, when I reach that point I'll just turn off ranked play. However, upon doing just that after my first online obstacle bowling course, I found myself in an unranked obstacle bowling game. In other words, once you hit a certain rank, you're permanently stuck having to deal with bowling being randomized. This is punishing the player for doing well, a horrible idea. That brings me to a bigger issue overall, a lack of freedom online. First, we have to discuss the reward system. Each game nets you a minimum of 30 points, 40 for bowling, and once you reach 100 points, you unlock a new random piece of gear based off what Nintendo put out that week. Some of this gear is the same on every console, but others are randomized, meaning you can get unlucky and be stuck seeing gear you really like on other people that just didn't show up for you. I also want to mention that the sportsmates are a lot more limited in terms of hairstyles than the Miis, yet the Miis can't wear many accessories like hats and face paint. Why? Smash managed to let Miis wear plenty of accessories more complicated than these just fine. Why is it so hard to slap sunglasses onto a Mii model? Then this may just be a me thing, but I dislike that these rewards can only be obtained online. You can't get these rewards facing CPU opponents in any local mode. Given that Switch Sports is based on a series which was designed for local play, I feel we should be able to get points playing by ourselves against CPUs too. Then double the current points earned when playing online. That incentivizes people to do so without forcing those who just wanted a base Wii Sports game. If Switch Sports had a shop they added new rewards to instead of cycling things out over time, I'd be less frustrated because I wouldn't feel like I need to get all the items for a week in one go. I could just play until I get enough points for the items I want and work at it over time. Exactly how I play Splatoon games. Then there's a lack of options. We already talked about bowling, and yeah, regular versus obstacle should be an option, not something that gets randomly picked for us. We should also be able to play regular bowling alongside survival if we wanted, opt out of facing off against doubles partners in tennis, and we should be able to play the other soccer modes available only locally. Actually, while the online soccer mode is my least favorite of the sports present, I do enjoy the 1v1 mode as the field is much smaller, and without teammates you have to be more active to win. It might sound like I hate this game. I don't. I have fun with the sports here when they work properly and when I get to play the versions of the sport I want to play. I also do like the addition of costumes, but it's annoying how tedious it is to unlock all of them for a week. When I have a friend over and we decide to launch it with no worries of rewards or having to wait to find teammates, that's when the game shines. Nintendo Switch Sports should have remained just that, a sequel to the Wii game. Instead, it feels like the developers forced this to be the online one, which had a negative effect on the overall package. You can't play every mode online, the items take too long to unlock, there's no rematch button to prevent you from having to back out all the way to the main menu again. There are too many inherent flaws in my opinion, when it could have avoided all of them by literally being Wii Sports with the option for online play.
Unfortunately, I didn't expect this, but I'm gonna have to put it at the bottom. This is a great local party game that actively discourages local play. I have fun with it, but I'm equally frustrated and upset by it when I feel I'm being forced to play online.
I'd like to admit something to you. As a Nintendo fan, I've gotten so used to everything being $60 that I've forgotten it's an exuberant amount of money to spend on something I may not even like. $60 for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe? Well, sure, I already own it on Wii U, but now it's portable. $60 for 3 old, unchanged Mario games? Well, I want to have them on Switch, so okay, I'll buy Mario 3D All-Stars. $60 for one 10-year-old Wii game I already own that's only mildly improved and was $10 less when it launched? You got it, one copy of Skyward Sword HD, please! Nintendo has gaslit me so well, that when I found out Nintendo Switch Sports was $50, instead of having the natural reaction of, it should be 40 max, my thought was, oh sweet, 10 bucks less than expected. This repeats with any title Nintendo doesn't price at 60, really.
So trust me, it means something when I tell you that Mario Strikers Battle League is not worth full price.
I played and loved Charged on the Wii, so a new Strikers game on Switch was one of my most hoped for announcements. Naturally, I was stoked when Battle League was announced. I'd heard that Mario sports games recently weren't up to the old standard, but Strikers was so fun, surely they'd be putting actual effort into this one, right? Well, they put lots of effort into the animations. But whereas the other Mario sports games at least had different modes or campaigns or something beyond the base experience, you can tell that Nintendo gave Next Level Games the same amount of dev time, and because Next Level put so much work into showing off the character's personality, that meant we only got the vanilla game. No story mode, no bonuses, nothing. With the game being named Battle League after the online component of the game, you'd think at least the base soccer experience that makes up the entire package could be played across the internet properly, right? Sure, with 2 people. If you want 3 or 4 players, you're gonna need 2 people together playing locally on 1 or both Switches. Yeah, 3 and 4 player modes are in the game, but you can't connect 3 or 4 Switches together. You've got to have 2 people playing on 1 Switch and 1 or 2 on the other. Those are your only options. You may think that makes it the perfect game to play when someone comes over then, but this isn't a pick up and play style game like Switch Sports. Strikers has a complicated control scheme, which works fine for someone who owns the game, but a new player is gonna need a lengthy tutorial before they can play properly. So Battle League has local unfriendly gameplay that insists you play locally alongside another player or pair in a separate household if you want more than 2 people. Oh sorry, did I forget to mention there is no 3 or 4 player local option either? This was a cheap cash grab made solely so Nintendo could claim they put a Mario Strikers game out on the Switch, with no value beyond the simple main mode. Some coworkers and I were actually hoping to form a team when this came out, only to discover 2 of us would have to live together in order to do so. If this game were $15 max on the eShop, it'd be fine. A neat diversion to get Strikers on the Switch without taking up too much dev time from other projects. But for full price, you can buy Breath of the Wild for $60. Mario Odyssey, Smash, Splatoon 3 are all $60, and Splatoon's a game you can play with 8 people in separate households. If you want to play Mario Strikers, do yourself a favor and find a way to play Charged on the Wii. As someone who bought ARMS on release day, this is the worst purchase I've made on Switch. Even the other Mario sports games on Switch seem like better deals. Okay, so I'm cutting in from the future now because when I went to get footage for this game last night, I discovered that now you can play locally with up to 8 people, and apparently I have not tested, but I read that now you can apparently connect more than 2 Switches online. And Nintendo just did not really announce this at any point when they announced the updates, probably because they were embarrassed to admit that the game had this problem in the first place of not being able to connect more than 2 Switches or play locally with more than 2 people. So I mean, yeah, the game is now more competent at the 1 mode, but this still doesn't fix the main issue that it only has the 1 game mode. It just has plane-based soccer and nothing else. So yeah, sure, game's like a bit better now, but the game should have never launched in the state it did in the first place, and it still isn't really a complete game. So my points still stand even if they're a bit outdated now.
Usually the worst game on my list is just some smaller indie game or quick little freebie that I still enjoy, I just don't find it mind-blowing. This may be the first game I've ranked I actively dislike. Sure, the base gameplay itself is fine, but it needs a lot more than just playing soccer to be worth the ridiculous price Nintendo is asking. Even as a $15 eShop trinket, it should have 4-player co-op across 4 different Switches. I still enjoy Nintendo Switch Sports, but Battle League isn't just the worst game of 2022. This is the worst game I've ranked since I began doing these in 2017. In fact, Paper Mario Sticker Star may have some tough competition for my least favorite game period. I'll have to think on that. Well, it's not the next game I purchased, the next game I played was Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And there was no way I'd be able to discuss this game properly without comparing it to Xenoblade 2, which is why I already made a whole video talking about these two games. If you want to hear my full thoughts on 3, watch that video after this one. But to put it in the rankings, whether this is your favorite Xenoblade story or not is going to come down to personal preference. But I can definitively say that 3 has the best gameplay of the entire series. The highest ranked game so far is Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and as much as I love that game, Xenoblade 3 easily outdoes it. 3 may just be my favorite in the whole Xenoblade series, and it's the only one I put down wanting to pick right back up. If you had asked me in February to guess what my game of the year for 2022 would be, well, I probably would have said Breath of the Wild sequel, but if you told me that would be delayed and then asked, I would have said Splatoon 3, no question.
Splatoon 3 is an objective improvement over Splatoon 2, and it's certainly better at launch than its immediate predecessor was when it first released. 3 continues the trend of taking what the previous Splatoon game built and directly improving on it. Adding just a couple new moves, the Squid Surge and Roll, are mild improvements that help in subtle ways, but over the hours upon hours this game can be played, they'll become clearly noticeable. The Squid Surge, which allows you to charge up walls, seems useless at first, until you realize it can bypass splotches of enemy ink, allowing you to reach the top even if you can't secure a single line of passage. This is mostly useful in Salmon Run, where it can help get up the fish stick boss when you're being swarmed by lesser salmonids. As for the Squid Roll, it's great for quick turns and for jumping off of walls. Each move has led to a small but significant number of slick new moves in multi and single player. While the connection errors still persist, Splatoon 3's lobby system is leagues ahead of the prior entries, especially 2's. I'm not sure if getting back into battles actually takes less time than in 2, but it certainly seems to. If it does take just as long, it's less noticeable as you can mess around in the test range within the lobby rather than stare at a screen of names and press buttons to play with the music. Whoa. I was worried I'd eventually get tired of just aimlessly inking the lobby, but Splatoon's game feel, the simple feedback of covering the walls and ground in ink, feels so inherently good it still hasn't gotten boring 85 plus hours in. Having the other players appear as ghosts is also a fun distraction, and sometimes a nice way to give your teammates a booyah after winning a match with them, or just screw around merging your squid and octoghosts. Though there are a couple things I'd like to add to the lobby system. Once you start matchmaking, you lose the ability to open lockers, a decision I find strange. When you do get stuck waiting for longer matches, this would be a nice distraction to pass the time. The biggest new idea I'd like to add though is the ability to play table turf while waiting for matches to start. You could argue it'd get annoying having a turn interrupted by the battle time text, but as long as the game could save where your cursor was hovering, I think this would be a great way to pass time even faster. It feels a bit strange to me that they created this whole mini-game with multiple opponents, unique dialogue, and over 150 cards, only to restrict it to a single player only stand in the outside Splatsville area. Especially seeing as there are table turf tables in the lobby. I'm hoping we get the ability to play in between rounds in a future update. And not that this is an original idea, I hope we get that jukebox soon. Data mining has found that there's one hidden under the floor, so I gotta hope it gets implemented in the near future. As for battles themselves, the balance feels way better than in 2. No weapon feels completely overpowered to the point it's unpunishable, except for blasters and the E-leader. Those still suck, but thankfully I see far less people with blasters in 3. I think because they realize Splatoon is supposed to be fun, and winning turf wars won't bring their dads back. But really, I think the improved balance is thanks to the specials, or more accurately, because Ink Armor is gone. Ink Armor kinda ruined 2's meta, giving players an instant win against this player option, so I'm glad to see it gone. That being said, I do miss my Baller, and I still miss my Kraken. I think 3 would have been the perfect time to bring back a weakened version of the Kraken, perhaps one that could be swatted away like the Baller in 2. This is just me being salty though. Never mind, we're Kraken business, yeah! There is one legitimate complaint I have about 3 though, and it's the maps. I'm in the minority in that I only consider Undertale Spillway and the rework of Mahi Mahi bad. Every other map is well made in my opinion. Thing is though, there's a certain type of map missing from 3's roster. Many maps in previous games had a decent number of more hidden away passages to ink, areas where you could be less worried about combat and could hide away while still contributing to the team. 3 doesn't have these. Look at just about any map in the game and you'll see they all have explicit home and enemy bases and a middle. In Splatoon 3, turf wars come down almost entirely to who was able to push into the enemy base better. I never felt this way in Splatoon 1 or 2. Yes, if the enemy gets well within your base and completely takes over, you're screwed, but you could often find ways out and win even without having to fight for it every match. 3's maps are centered primarily on the combat though. These maps are great in a vacuum, but I miss the variety. Take a look at Kelp Dome for example. Yes, there's still an enemy and home base, but there's so many ways to traverse the map that it doesn't just come down to pushing past the center. Maps like Camp Triggerfish or Moray Towers get a lot of slack for not having this specific mid, but the thing is I like that these maps force you to engage in turf wars in completely different ways. In fact, I'd say I love Camp Triggerfish. Yes, I'll agree they're not perfect for competitive play, but these maps put so much more emphasis on finding unique, interesting ways to go about battling rather than only rewarding you for taking over the center and moving into enemy base. Splatoon 3's theme is supposed to be chaos, so why doesn't the map design reflect this? If anything, 3 should have some of the wackiest stage design and gimmicks to showcase the Splatland's anarchist motifs. Instead, we're left with a group of maps which all encourage the exact same aggressive playstyle, which not only makes every match feel the same, it harms the game's weapon balance as well. While I do think the weapons themselves are better balanced, the map design gives distinct advantages to chargers like the E-Leader and removes the appeal of weapons designed to be more passive. I hope 3 puts more emphasis on wacky map designs in the future. Heck, just port more maps straight over from 2. On to Salmon Run, the next wave is, like Turf Wars, a direct improvement on 2's. The egg throwing mechanic is the biggest change, and it's so easily implemented I can't even imagine ever going back to play 2's Salmon Run, where I need to manually swim up to the basket every time. Whereas the Squid Roll and Surge have minor uses, there's not a single Salmon Run shift where I don't throw an egg. I think specifically because of this mechanic, I feel I have much more agency over the game. Don't get me wrong, it's still chaotic as heck, but I don't feel afraid to play the mode anymore. I reached a point in 2 where I actively avoided Salmon Run simply because it felt so unfair and I didn't want to get demoted. The new bosses and King Salmonid fights are also fun additions, though with new mechanics come new issues, and with the King Salmonids, I have an issue with how scales are distributed. You can only get scales for encountering King Salmonid, but even when defeating one, the rewards are completely randomized. I've gotten 2 gold skills, and both of them were from fights I lost. Actually winning granted me little more than simply encountering a King Salmonid would in the first place. And the game expects you to get so many in order to unlock items. I discovered I need 40 silver skills and 100 bronze for the pink slop suit, and after all this time I'm struggling to hit 10 silver. The other issue with this system, aside from the randomness, is that King Salmonid only appear after completing 3 waves successfully. This doesn't sound so bad, but as you rank up, simply getting through jobs successfully becomes harder and harder, effectively making it more difficult to even reach the King Salmonid to have a chance at scales in the first place. I think that scales should just have set amounts they show up in depending on your performance. Bronze you get a certain amount no matter what just for seeing a king. Silver you get for surviving, whether you win or not, and you're guaranteed a gold for winning. We could still have chances to luck out and get a silver or gold randomly, but performing better could guarantee we get specific rewards, so we're not having to grind and grind only to be given a bunch of bronzes again. Lastly, there's the single player, and this is the part of the game that most improves on 2. I do have one minor gripe, but it's about the final boss, so if you don't want even vague, unrevealing details, cover your ears for about 19 seconds in 3, 2, 1. My one little gripe is that Octo Expansion completely threw us for a loop with an unpredictable final boss, but the identity and even nature of 3's final boss is much more predictable. I personally was hoping for a bit more of a twist. That being said, I did still like what they did with the concept. As for everything else, it's just perfect. After 2 story mode was such a disappointment and Octo expansion was so great, I can gladly say 3 story mode follows more in the DLC campaign's footsteps. In fact, the game makes Octavio the first boss you fight to directly tell you, nah, we're not going down the same path as the other 2. After that, you're thrown into a more Octo expansion-esque campaign where you have to complete certain missions to continue. Everything is based on power eggs, so you can happily skip any kettles you don't want to do and just gun straight for the bosses of each area. That being said, you're rewarded for beating every level in the game, as beating more levels reveals more of the alternal logs, which reveal the deep, apocalyptic Splatoon lore we've all come to love. Rather than making you play every single level with every single weapon type, 3 story mode goes the OE route of providing a selection of 1 to 3 weapons to choose from, allowing stages to be built around those specific weapons so they're not overly basic to account for each weapon type in the game. Your little buddy acts as a unique mechanic, replacing your sub-weapon with a salmonid that can latch onto and bite distant objects. You even have a skill tree. By far, my favorite change is the fact that scrolls are found outside of levels. Splatoon 1 and 2's levels were linear treks to the goal, aside from some mini Zapfish stages. Because of this, searching for scrolls inside levels felt tedious. I'd have to check every nook and cranny of every platform just to make sure I wasn't missing anything. In 3 though, the only extras you can find inside levels are bundles of power eggs. So scrolls, decorations, salmoninium to upgrade your gear, and CDs to improve the soundtrack are all found in Splatoon's best hub world yet. All in all, you end up with a more interactable hub world, tighter levels, a story that isn't copy-pasted from ones, and Callie is with you the whole time. Splatoon 3 is overall a better experience than 1 and 2, with the story mode being the most obvious improvement from its predecessor. For all my gripes, especially with the map design, it's still the best entry in one of my favorite series. While I had less complaints about Xenoblade 3, I think Splatoon 3 managed to overcome all its issues simply by being the series I've loved since its emergence 7 years ago.
For that reason, I am putting Splatoon 3 above Xenoblade 3 as my favorite game of 2023.
I meant 2022. There were too many 2s and 3s, guys. I got mixed up. I'm sorry.
But just barely. Xenoblade 3 is too good and Splatoon 3 is too flawed for it to catapult past Xeno 3. I'm still so enamored with Splatoon as a whole though, I have to let my love for these gremlin cephalopods win out. This is probably the closest to a tie I've ever had for my game of the year, and I wouldn't be surprised if Xenoblade and Splatoon 3 hold that record perpetually. Normally, I would have skipped over my game of the year to come back to it last, but this year we end the same way we started, with Pokemon.
After my high praise of Legends Arceus, it won't surprise you to hear that I was hoping Scarlet and Violet, in my case Violet, would follow in its footsteps. So, how does it stack up to its not even 12 months older predecessor? There's a lot to cover with this game, especially in relation to Arceus. If you spent any amount of time on the internet, you've probably seen plenty of complaints about its performance and glitches. And yeah, you know how Breath of the Wild runs in Korok Forest? That's how this game runs most of the time. Just about every other game I've played with performance issues doesn't have them bad enough for them to affect the whole experience. They're normally something that might pop up here and there, and may slightly dampen the mood, but I can't say any other game I've played has them so bad that they would knock it down a whole point if I did number scores. Sure, ahead in time may randomly freeze, but I don't recall that being more than once per level, and then the game would run great the rest of the time. Age of Calamity had frame drops, but the game was still plenty playable. I never say I missed an attack because of them. At least not to my memory. Here though, there is no consistent frame rate whatsoever. If the game ran at a consistent 30 or even 20 FPS, it'd still work fine, but as is, the world slows down to such a degree that it would miss inputs. The game stutters at every camera movement, every action, you'll run into Pokemon you don't mean to, Not because you made a mistake, but because the game couldn't register your button press until a full 2 seconds after you entered it. People like to rag on the Switch for being underpowered, but the fact Age of Calamity runs better than this proves it ain't the system, it's the game. And unfortunately, I can't jump straight into raving about what this game does right when you look past the performance, because it's got plenty of design flaws too. In my Arceus section, I spent a good amount of time discussing how the mounts could flow better if they rolled into one rather than 3 separate Pokemon. This game does just that. I would love to tell you how much Miraidon improved the experience without having to switch between 3 different Pokés on the ground. Unfortunately, this game's movement mechanics are just worse than Legends. Conceptually, yes, the box art legendaries work better than Arceus mounts. However, I found Miraidon getting stuck on things far more than Weirdeer. Miraidon got stuck trying to jump over small ledges at least as often, if not more. Jumping with Miraidon feels weird comparatively, it never seems to move exactly how I want it to. But I think the biggest issue with Miraidon's movement isn't the ride Pokemon itself, but rather the fact that this game uses the Sword Shield system for Pokemon hitboxes, rather than Arceus. In Arceus, your trainer has their own hitbox separate from your Pokemon, so when you run into a Pokemon, you take damage. And yes, if you take enough, you'll pass out, but accidentally running into one Pokemon just means you need to run away for a bit until you auto-heal. You won't enter an actual battle in Legends unless you deliberately throw a Pokeball containing one of your Pokemon at a wild one. In Gen 8 and now Scarlet and Violet, we're back to trainers having no health of their own, and all battling being done through Pokemon themselves. So any contact with any wild Pokemon, and you have to watch the battle UI come up and either kill, catch, or successfully run from them in order to end it. You can no longer move in the battle either, so there's no literally running away to end the battle. You have to rely on the antiquated run option and hope the game doesn't decide you couldn't get away for whatever unnecessary reason. These battles are made worse by the fact they're just as slow as pre-Arceus. Every stat change is its own message and animation, every move takes several seconds, and you have no way of immediately ending a battle if you accidentally enter one. Getting back to Miraidon, these battles are where it's most negatively affected as a mount. Sometimes the hitbox for Pokemon seems far larger than it should be. You can have a full in-game foot of distance between yourself and a field Pokemon and still end up somehow touching it while on Miraidon. There's no way to barrel through without worrying about them either. The best you can do is jump and glide and hope you don't land on one when you hit the ground. Obviously, this is a problem I encountered a lot. Wild Pokemon levels upon levels below you can end up taking just as much of your time as a Pokemon the same level as yours, which you have a strong, super effective move against. There's no earthbound system, as I like to call it, where weaker enemies don't waste your time. Having all Pokemon out in the field, visible to the eye, with none just hiding in grass, is a far superior system to random encounters. However, the way it's set up in Violet, you'll still end up in a staggering number of battles you don't want to take part in. There should be a way to add a repel effect to Miraidon, or better yet, Pokemon should have their hitboxes changed so you're not constantly running into ones with a clear gap between Miraidon's model and theirs. While we're on the topic of things this game should have taken from Legends Arceus, I want to discuss the Let's Go feature. In Gen 8, everything was tied to your trainer. Picking up items, encountering Pokemon, all of it. Arceus allowed you to throw Pokeballs with your Pokemon freely, allowing you to throw them at distant items to pick them up for you, or encounter faraway wild Pokés. Gen 9 introduces a cross between these two styles with the Let's Go feature. You can press R to send your Pokemon out in the direction you're facing to pick up items, but more often to auto-battle wild Pokemon. Auto-battles are something even Legends didn't have, and yes, I love this edition. It provides a quick way to gain lots of XP in a short period of time, without having to enter battles repeatedly. However, only being able to send out your Pokemon in a straight line in the direction you're facing is a detriment, and it's basically never useful for item collection. The free-throwing nature of Arceus meant if I was traveling north and I saw an item I wanted to the west, I could throw a Pokeball over there and continue walking the direction I was going without pause. It's a fluid flow state. In Violet though, what's the point? I can't send my Pokemon super far, and sending the Pokemon out isn't nearly as quick either. It's pretty much always faster to collect the item myself. There are also tons of little things this game could have adapted from Arceus that it failed to. The ability to control your lead Pokemon with just a tap of the D-pad, catching Pokemon without battling. It's absolutely no secret that I consider Arceus far superior in terms of gameplay. But that's not to say it outdoes Violet in every aspect. One of the few advancements Gen 9 makes that Legends Arceus doesn't is actually going open world. Legends has open areas, but the story itself is still completely linear. I was fully expecting Arceus to have the better story between the 2 or 3 games. Arceus takes things in a new direction, whereas Gen 9 goes back to the familiar gym trotting quest to become champion. Much to my surprise, Gen 9 outdoes Legends in its execution. Pokemon Shield is easily my least favorite in the Pokemon games I've played, much in part due to its forced, hastily thrown together story. Everything happens at the very end of the game. Until that point, literally right before you fight the champion, the game is just a copy-paste gym challenge. Then you're whisked away for an obligatory legendary fight the writers seemingly forgot was supposed to happen before the credits rolled. You fight the champion with your newly acquired legendary, and the game's over. Gen 9 thankfully avoids this by letting you decide which storyline to progress when. Yes, there is a recommended order based on level, but you by no means have to follow it. My first gym, for example, was actually the third toughest. This freedom not only ensures storylines stay interesting, as you're never forced to engage in one you'd rather avoid at the moment, it also means you get to set your own difficulty. I've never once lost a battle to any other villainous team in the franchise, yet 3/5 of Violet's Team Star managed to wipe my entire team on my first attempt. I do find it ironic that the team of misunderstood teens, which pose virtually no threat to the region, are far more difficult than any band of literal terrorists willing to kill for their cause, but that's not a complaint, just a funny observation. The fact I had any trouble at all playing Pokemon Violet is a major plus. If you think Pokemon games are too easy and you always have to force special rules upon yourself, such as a Nuzlocke, Gen 9 may be the first games in a while you can enjoy without having to play with special rules. Just fight gyms, titans, and Team Star bases outside the recommended order, and you can wind up with a pretty natural challenge. The Team Star storyline is decently interesting. We've gotten quite a bit more playful with what villain teams can be since Gen 7, and I'd say Gen 9 has a fresh take on the formula. The gym challenge is still pretty basic, but it does at least have Larry. While some may complain about Nimona being basic too, to me she's the Pokemon company making fun of themselves for the one-dimensional rivals we've had the last few gens. Being so over-obsessive with battling, the game calls attention to and jokes about it. Then there's the third path, the Path of Legends, where you fight imposing Titan Pokemon to steal the herbs you're guarding for better sandwiches. Would you believe me if I told you this is the plotline that made me cry? Arven starts out seeming like he'll be this pushy, annoying character. Then you defeat a couple Titans and yeah, he's probably one of the best characters in the series. And much like Kirby, the absolute peak of this adventure is saved for the very end. Exploring Paldea and completing these 3 plotlines is fun and all, but once you've finished all 3 of them, that's when you encounter my favorite sequence in any Pokemon game. Oh yeah, I totally forgot to mention the Pokemon themselves. Aside from one new legendary, all of Legends Arceus' new mons had to be variations of previous Pokemon, or new evolutions of past ones. Since Gen 9 is mainline though, we could have made a whole bunch of fully new Pokés. The neat thing is, you'll actually see new Pokemon all around. I felt like in Gen 8 I'd only occasionally find a new mon that wasn't shown in trailers, or visible right off the bat in early routes or the wild area. Here, they're all around, and in plenty of different forms too. There are single stage ones who've had their pre-evils shown but whose final evils are mysteries, new evolutions for past Pokemon that weren't even hinted at. It's super fun to find new Pokemon everywhere, or discover a Pokemon you weren't sure could evolve does have another stage. Speaking of which, I know the fan favorite new fairy type and Pokemon in general is Tinkaton. And as much as I love this little gremlin and included on my team, the biggest surprise for me was Fido's evolution. Dachshund! It's a dachshund made of baked bread, and it's so cute. They made a dachshund Poké, and I had no idea until Fido evolved without warning. I love it so much, and I think I'm legally obligated to consider this my favorite Pokemon now. I don't think it's any surprise that I consider Legends Arceus the better game. Even if Pokemon Scarlet and Violet ran at a stable frame rate, Arceus' fluidity is unmatched. I would much rather have to actively choose to enter a battle than constantly be forced into one because a Pokemon's hitbox is double the size of its body. Battles in Violet take longer, you lose out on the agile and strong style moves of Arceus, the controls on and off your ride Pokemon feel so much worse. I could go on. Although Scarlet and Violet did impress me with their new Pokemon, open-ended nature, and story, even outdoing anything in Legends with the final act, I felt much more in control during the hours of gameplay I spent in Legends Arceus. To mimic every other Pokemon YouTuber, I think the perfect Pokemon game would have the gameplay of Arceus with the mainline elements and story of Scarlet and Violet.
So I'd easily put Legends Arceus ahead of Pokemon Violet. But unfortunately, I'm afraid I can only have this list represent my actual opinions on the game's quality in a universe where Doxman doesn't exist.
To Scarlet and Violet's credit, I think it's really saying something that the game released in this poor of a condition, and yet I still came away with a positive opinion on it. In a weird way, it also cemented my place as a continuing Pokemon fan by showing me, even with the design issues of the series and an Arceus awful performance, the basic structure of Pokemon is intrinsically fun regardless. Hang on a minute. I played a new entry in a struggling series that starts out with a slow, tedious intro, which leaves a kinda bad first impression. It has tons of graphical and performance issues with immense pop-in and frame rate issues, and a mostly ugly world. This paired with some design flaws makes the game look like trash to those outside the fandom, yet most who are already fans can see the inherent fun in the game despite these issues. It brings them an open world experience they've been begging for, with a renewed focus on storytelling absent from previous games. And this all results in most fans still enjoying the game and even considering a return to form for the series, while those outside the fandom looking in see them all as crazy?
Dear God, I did play Sonic Frontiers.
While I did play less new games in 2022 than most years since I began these rankings, in a typical year I have a few small indie games that only last a few hours. This year, every single player game I bought or played had an approximate playtime of around 20 hours minimum. Every other game was made to be played endlessly, successful or otherwise in that goal. Considering I played 2 massive JRPGs, which took me over 100 hours to beat for one playthrough, and the latest entry in the only online multiplayer series I love, which exists to go on forever, it's no surprise 3 of the games I started in 2022 wound up in the top row of my Switch's most played titles. As Nintendo doesn't seem to be letting up on the releases in 2023, I think it's fair to say I need to do something about this issue of getting behind on playing games, because I want to talk about the games I've already played. I've said this plenty of times and it hasn't quite worked out, but this time I think I've genuinely devised a solution for how I'll handle my 23 games video that should allow me to maintain the quality I set in my 21 video and still let me keep up with the games relatively close to their release date.
So thank you for watching and for listening to me ramble about games once again. I'll see you again at the end of the year, or perhaps it'll be much sooner.